Hello again everyone and welcome back to The Underground. This is the Intel update for February 1st through the 7th, 2026. The main focus for this week has been a building and brooding of several more long-term issues around the world, so let's get right to it. Starting off overseas, the negotiations with the Iranians apparently went well, or rather not great but also not terrible. The first day of negotiation was amiable and more talks are planned. In terms of the likelihood of another round of American strikes, this is always on the table as the United States is really the one that has the final say on whether or not future targeting is carried out. In the short term, there are probably two flashpoints to be aware of that might indicate when strikes will take place. One, if the United States thinks that the Iranians are stalling or stringing along the negotiating team without actually ever making any progress towards some sort of compromise, the United States will simply strike the facilities that they've been working on more publicly. Likewise, the Iranians are also between a rock and a hard place because even if they agree to a deal, they're probably going to get struck anyway, so that will be something to watch for sure. Also overseas, something concerning in a vastly different way lies with revelations that have emerged in the United Kingdom this week regarding a series of incidents that took place almost a year ago involving Prime Minister Starmer. Since the justice system in the United Kingdom is extremely protective of accused criminals, in nearly all cases we simply do not know what events transpire until many months later. And this case is no exception, so we'll talk about that in just a moment because this case is becoming just as interesting as the revelations that have come to light within the homeland this week. Around the United States this week, the unrest has continued as before. I know, the classic line once again. Now that Minneapolis is ramping down and settling in for the long haul, the organization has been continuing around the nation among far-left activist groups. Make no mistake, even though the B-roll is days old and there aren't any flashy headlines to doom scroll when it comes to the unrest, the situation is not just as dangerous as before, but even more so, especially now that a new demographic is involved: children. Nationwide, school teachers are increasingly becoming involved in getting the children in their classes to take part in anti-ICE demonstrations, and quite a few events like this have come to a head over the past week. Please forgive me for this thrown-together graphic, but I'm currently plotting all of the schools which have gotten their students to protest for the political causes of the teachers. So far, I have geolocated protests taking place in the following cities: Seattle, Auburn, Los Angeles, Menifee, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Austin, Fremont, Louisville, and New York City. And that's just the start. I haven't had enough time to actually drop a point on most of these sites because it's quite literally hundreds of schools around the country, so this map only shows the more kinetic underage student protests which have either caused damage or resulted in a student being severely injured. All of these locations have been hosted to increasingly more serious indoctrination now that Minneapolis is winding down, and the far-left activist groups know with reasonable certainty that the federal government is not going to target them in any way whatsoever. Just like we observed last week, the state and the local and the federal government all working together to kind of reduce tensions in Minneapolis doesn't really matter when it comes to the activist groups. For a lot of these groups, it has become increasingly clear that these organizations perceive that they have achieved victory. The far left thinks that they have won in Minneapolis, and as such, the funding and resources have continued to flow to other cities nationwide. Whether or not they've actually won in Minneapolis and gotten the federal government to back down, that's up for you to decide. It's debatable either way, but what's very clear is that the left thinks they won, and that's an important distinction to make. And now they are more openly getting children to serve as foot soldiers for their cause, which is a development that has gotten quite serious over the past week. The scale of these underage student protests is no more clearly illustrated than in Salt Lake City, where school teachers are actually directly organizing protests for very young children to take part in during the school day, all without the parents even knowing about it. Other schools around the country are trying to conceal the involvement of the teachers and staff, saying that the students themselves came up with the idea for a walkout protest. However, in many locations, this pretense has been thrown out the window, and far-left activist teachers are openly stating that they are running these juvenile protests. However, as serious as this is, it gets worse. In Salt Lake City specifically, middle schoolers have been observed throwing rocks at passing vehicles, smashing windows, and otherwise causing property damage during these walkouts. Children have been led on marches throughout the city over the past few days, which are becoming increasingly more dangerous for all involved. In Nebraska, last week, a juvenile student taking part in an anti-ICE protest outside Fremont High School was hit by a vehicle after running out into traffic to harass a vehicle that was displaying a Trump flag. A similar situation also took place at Heritage High School in Menifee, California, which involved a 15-year-old student ramming a motorcyclist with their vehicle during an anti-ICE protest. In most states, even very young elementary school children are being taught to protest in class by their activist teachers, and the children are actively protesting out next to major highways during recess. All of these incidents over the past few days indicate that the next wave of foot soldier has been selected. Far-left activist groups cannot get the numbers that they need, so they go after the population that cannot consent, which is children. It does not take a crystal ball to see that these incidents will continue to expand and get vastly more serious over the next few weeks. As the winter weather season starts to ease up, activism season will become much more substantial now that the far-left groups have no one to stop them. Remember, a lot of conservative parents got put on no-fly lists and were targeted ruthlessly by the FBI because they were upset at school board meetings. There has been no accountability for this, and as such, parents are extremely limited in what options they have to redress their concerns about teachers forcing their children to take part in political protests or be recruited like a child soldier into a political movement. So, over the next few weeks, expect more children to be injured or killed while being encouraged by their teachers to protest out in the street. Not a great outlook, I know, but I'm going to do a little bit more research on this throughout the week, so we'll see how things develop from here. But let's move on to the next topic before I Fed post too hard on this one. Overseas, things are not going so well in jolly old England either, but in a vastly different way. This entire case is a rather unfortunate rabbit hole, and I'm going to drag all of you down here with me, so buckle up. Back in May of 2025, a few people threw Molotovs at Starmer's personal residences, targeting several locations and properties linked to Starmer in some way. At the time of the first attack, it looked like a schizo or just some kind of disgruntled citizen, right? After all, politicians get a lot of heat by being in the public eye, and the security details of world leaders they're keeping pretty busy these days. There's always some kind of incident like this, so as kinetic as it is, it's not really that remarkable because this stuff happens all the time. However, in this case, it happened again. And again. On May 8th, 2025, somebody set Starmer's vehicle on fire in Kentish Town. It's not clear as to if the vehicle was actually his or one that he had previously owned, since in the UK the license plate database is public record, so you can look up a license plate and see who actually owns that particular plate and vehicle. So it's not clear if somebody just looked up an old license plate and found out that that was Starmer's old car, or if there was something more to it. I'll let you decide what the most likely scenario is because of what happened next. 3 days after this attack on Starmer's car, the front door of Starmer's old apartment in Islington was firebombed, and the very next morning, the next day, one of Starmer's old family homes was firebombed as well in a similar manner. Again, at the time this was taking place last year, this seemed like a rather simple crime spree, some political targeting effort by a disgruntled citizen, or something like that. And for many months this was the predominant theory, until the actual arrest reports became public and a bit of a pattern emerged. So far, a total of 5 individuals have been arrested in conjunction with last year's attacks, with the 5th suspect being arrested a couple of days ago. So the most recent mugshot is not available at present, and probably won't be available for a few months. The 4th male who was arrested was not identified because he was not charged with a crime. They're still investigating him though, so I've got him on the slide, but something tells me that I can guess with a pretty good accuracy what these 2 mugshots would look like. Pardon me if this is a bit of a stretch, but I think we're going to have to go on a little bit of gut instinct here because so far all of the arrests that have been made have resulted in a bit of a pattern, haven't they? If you are unfortunate enough to Google these individuals' names and some of the other photos that I will not be showing of these individuals, you can very clearly discern that all of the suspects so far are male prostitutes, all from Eastern Europe, mostly Ukraine. Now, this begs the rather unfortunate question of why 5 separate gay Eastern European male prostitutes would know the exact addresses of where Prime Minister Starmer lived. Unlike in America, where these things are comparatively easy to find, it's extremely hard to find the exact mailing address or street address of where politicians live, especially the Prime Minister. Granted, I am aware of how the internet works these days. One crazy schizo on the internet with a bone to pick can certainly find pretty much anything they want. But I find it far more likely that the reason this band of merry men knew where Starmer lived is because they had been there before. And hell hath no fury like a gay Ukrainian prostitute scorned, I guess. So, this is where things stand. Not a lot of solid information, but this case also keeps developing every few months, at least. And wouldn't you know it, details about this case always seem to come out right when Starmer is having a rough time with public relations. So, I find this very, very interesting. The UK government is not doing super well right now. They've got a lot of immigration issues, a lot of social dissent. Everyone is very upset, and they cannot voice it so much because of, again, the crackdown on speech in the UK, which we've covered extensively over the past few years. So yeah, things are not going super well throughout the UK, and I find it very interesting that this sort of thing comes to light, especially in the context of the other very compromising documents that have been sweeping the internet for the past few weeks. I am, of course, referring to the Epstein files, which have resulted in lots of heads of state, lots of very high-ranking politicians issuing letters of apology and stepping down from their positions. So I don't know if this Starmer freakishness is related to any of that stuff, but so far it just seems like this is one rather unfortunate case to heap on the pile of terrible that is, the daily lives and the social lives of the political elite. I'm sure all of this is linked together, even if it's just tangential. I mean, the biggest significant part of this is really just the fact that stuff like this, when it hits the mainstream news and when, like, the BBC, the state-controlled media of the UK, is even allowed to talk about stuff like this, it starts the normies asking a lot of questions, and interesting conversations will be had all around over this stuff, and especially the Epstein stuff, which we'll talk about next. But we're having to explain this to people who are now just starting to become aware of some of how the world works in these ways. And a lot of this is very clearly illustrated by the Epstein documents. So what can we say about the latest round of Epstein documents? Well, I'm sure a lot of people have a lot to say about it, and a lot of information has been released by the DOJ, but most of it isn't really that useful. Right now, there's also a lot of very misleading information that is saturating the overall database, as the Department of Justice released any and every outlandish report that was sent in to the FBI's tip lines regarding Epstein. Many of these reports include very wild claims, which are then screenshot by influencers and posted online for engagement farming purposes. So this is a really tough battle we're going to have to wade through for a bit. Same thing with a lot of the other verbiage, which is being assumed to be code word for something far more sinister. Now, there are, of course, code words in these networks. We got a lot of these code words from the Podesta network from a few years ago, which heavily used a lot of code words and phrases and trigger words and things like that in a lot of those communications, right? And in the Epstein emails, the emails directly to Jeffrey Epstein himself seem to include a lot of these words. For instance, the phrase pizza with grape soda appears a lot in the database, right? And this appears in a very odd context if you read the full email chain where it's mentioned, right? So you can clearly see that they're talking about something, right? What these code words exactly mean is, well, I mean, generally we know what these things mean, but specifically like combinations like pizza and grape soda, we don't actually know with 100% certainty what Epstein was using that for. We just know parenthetically what the rest of these horrific communities tend to use these words for, right? So yes, these networks do use code words. We've known this for many, many years. This is a common knowledge kind of thing, right? However, not everything in the Epstein emails is a code for something. As an example, this one email was circulating a few days ago on social media talking about Epstein referencing muffins, or the word muffin somehow being a code word for something. But if you actually search for more context throughout the database, you can find out that turns out the freak actually likes real muffins for breakfast. And thus this line of inquiry is probably not worth more investigative effort, especially not with other more damning stuff in the files. The more ridiculous and out-of-context reports are absolutely diverting attention away from more concerning and legitimate information in the database. I think they're doing this intentionally. They dump all the files, millions of pages of things that don't matter, so as to obfuscate the stuff that does matter in the files, such as travel dates, names, and associations that can be cross-referenced with other prior court documents, all of which will take some time to investigate. Due to Epstein himself being barely literate in his own emails, which could be intentional, it's going to be challenging to use advanced tools to fully analyze this data set, and millions of pages of documents are going to take years to investigate by hand. Otherwise, releasing millions of pages of documents all at once results in a few different scenarios taking place in the short term, right? Everyone now treats the Epstein files like a crystal ball. They see what they want to see, and everyone sees something different. Supporters of one particular politician will look at the documents and say that the files exonerate them, while opponents will say that the same documents implicate them. This has already happened with one of the bigger names in the Epstein files, President Trump, right? President Trump himself says that, hey, we released all these Epstein documents, and these documents prove that I'm innocent of any of this stuff. Whereas other people say, no, these documents directly implicate you in a lot of stuff, right? I have not dug into that enough to where I would feel comfortable pointing fingers in very specific ways at the moment. I just generally think that every elected official is going to be implicated in some way with this. I don't care how innocent they seem. You got to understand, this was an intelligence operation. This was not just, an entertainment weekend. This was a very substantial network, and I think everybody's got their hands in it, right? Irrelevant and misleading documents aside, once most serious investigations get underway that don't rely on simply hitting Control F and searching for keywords in the database, the picture is going to become much more clear. As it currently stands, an awful lot of people are implicated or compromised in some way at this point, to the level that even the normies are out there starting to understand just how compromised very high-ranking politicians are. In exactly what manner, by whom, and with what evidence, and what blackmail is being used, specifically, we don't know yet. We may never know in many cases, but the investigations continue nonetheless. We have to remember the larger context here, right? This guy, Jeffrey Epstein, and his staff ran a vast, degenerate empire that the world will never forget. And if we hope to shut down other similar networks to the Epstein organization, hanging on the every word of social media influencers for what is important or damning is probably not a wise move in the long run. The Epstein files are a lightning rod topic. So you're not going to see, say, the Rand Corporation come out and write a report on Epstein. You're not going to see CISA come out. You're not going to see any of these big think tanks come out and conduct and fund more investigative efforts that the FBI is not doing, because the Epstein network, well, for a lot of that, everyone got away except for Epstein, right? Well, even that's debatable these days because everybody's thinking he's still alive. But you see the idea here. But anyway, this is why you're seeing most of this being run by the internet anons, because they're the only ones with any sort of ability to actually talk about this stuff, because, well, guess what? A lot of people who are in the public eye, their friends were friends with Epstein. That's what makes it very hard to investigate. It would be very, very nice to get some six-figure funding behind any kind of investigative effort on looking into what Jeffrey Epstein's network did after Epstein stepped aside from the operation, either by incarceration or death or whatever. That would be very, very interesting to do, right? You've got protesters in Minneapolis that are being given 5-6 figures to go stand in the street with signs, but yet anybody who wants to look into the Epstein thing it's all hushed tones and private DMs from people who say, you know, I'd love to help you, man, but I can't have my name associated with anything Epstein because this, that, or the other, right? That's why this Epstein thing is such a big elephant in the room, because a lot of people are implicated in it, and everybody who's implicated in it, who's powerful, got away with it. We've got a lot of work to do, because as disturbing as some of these Epstein emails are, especially knowing what's behind the emails and what they're talking about and what they're setting up, just looking through the looking glass at this organization and the horrific stuff they did, just know that the really horrific stuff probably wasn't written down in his email account, at least not this email account. Text messages, private couriers, names, dates, odometer readings, thermal heat signatures of Epstein Island that can be detected with agricultural satellites. All of this other stuff that's not being released by the DOJ are critical parts of understanding how Epstein's network operated after this hit the media, and the rats scurried to create their own networks. From my wheelhouse, I'm focused on my own investigations on the more national security angle, such as the politicians and military decision makers that are being blackmailed by foreign governments, or actually mostly just one government. But anyway, we'll see what names, dates, and locations will come to light over the next few weeks. It's been a really heavy week all around, a lot of very heavy data stuff, not a whole lot of way of encapsulating this in a very succinct way today, I'm afraid. And as a result, that's pretty much all I have at the moment. I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about a lot more because it's been a really crazy week, and it's just been too overwhelming and too much to handle, honestly, just with the amount of stuff that's happened. Even working really long hours every single day barely scratches the surface with most of this stuff. And I've also been working a lot of overtime to get some of the more educational content produced for those of you who don't really like the more current event news report kind of things. So things take a lot of time these days, and time is in short supply, but that's okay. Better some limited progress than no progress at all, right? And speaking of running out of time, I was only able to catch the tail end of the GhostNet this week as I was tied up with a bit of video editing, but I was still able to get a few of you out there exchanging information and keeping the net going. The more routine and mundane stuff like working on radios often elicits a lot of groaning from those who don't enjoy such topics. I know, I'm that way myself. But at the end of the day, having a nationwide network of people all linked together over the airwaves at all times, even during a crisis, that's a very powerful and reassuring foundation to lean on. So let's keep at it and continue to do good stuff with it. We may not be able to do very much about the horrific news of the day, but that also doesn't mean that we can do nothing. Sometimes, when there isn't any favorable course of action that is feasible, the best option is to bide time, learn new skills, build new things, and most importantly, keep as many options open as possible for as long as possible. Right now, we may not be able to do very much at all as a citizenry about what's in the Epstein files, for instance, but I can certainly learn how to work a radio. I can certainly plot critical information on a map and start mapping out some of this stuff. I can certainly go for a hike with a heavy backpack, and I can certainly hit the gym every day. That stuff may seem meaningless right now, but over time, these skills will be needed. We're in it for the long haul, and there's plenty of work that needs to be done. We cannot hope to tackle the big issues if we can't handle the little issues first, so let's work on that stuff, and over time, let's raise the bar of expectations for the average American. We can't expect things to get better if we don't raise our expectations of what it means to be an American, and we can't raise our expectations of others unless we raise the expectations of ourselves first. So let's get after it and do the best we can. And on the research and data side of things, all of the source material for everything I've mentioned today can be found on my Obsidian page, where a bunch of other links can be found as well. I know it's kind of difficult to find my work sometimes because I work on a lot of separate projects that are hard to put in one place, but I'm making some improvements on how to more easily get the resources that anyone might need. So that's all I have for today. Thank you all for sticking around. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.